Good evening, everyone. It is just about, I don't know, 6 o'clock or so on August 27, 2019. And today we are concluding the comparison between the Mojo and the Cobalt with respect to their sound signature. And today's focus is going to be on the treble. We've done the bass, we've done the mids, and now it's time for the treble. I have 3 songs set up that we're going to test on my standard test playlist. We're going to do Flight from the City from Johan Johansson. We are going to test New Light by Kazuki, and we're also going to test The Big Ship, a song that one of my subscribers so very kindly suggested I look at, and it was part of his test playlist, and fantastic song. So thank you so much once again to you. We are testing using an A-B switch. The Cobalt is plugged into a USB 3.0 hub, which is itself plugged into a USB 3.0 port. I have the Mojo plugged into a USB 3.0 port as well, but the Mojo does not have 3.0 capability. It's just transferring data through that port. And our testing headphone is the Allo Audio S4R, the closed-back headphone. And before we start, I do want to mention that I finally got the replacement battery for the Chord Mojo today, and I'm going to try to find an alternative to that battery because it's about $90 US dollars, including shipping. So if I can find something that is the same thing but cheaper, I will, and I'll upload the changing of the battery video probably tomorrow or the day after. But for today, let us start with the treble test. So as I said, the first test that we're going to do is with the song Flight from the City. And A and B is going to be designated at the bottom of the video. So go ahead and skip ahead if you want to skip ahead to the next song, or if you want to go back and forth. Hopefully that will be easier. A is going to be the Cobalt. B is going to be the Mojo. So let me first queue up the Cobalt here in Windows 10. Okay, I have the Cobalt queued up. Hopefully it will actually register. And let's start. And here we go. The Cobalt is currently master volume at 12. I'm going to increase to 25%. There's a fair amount of air to the song, but it's not overwhelming air, meaning that the piano does sound rather robust without sounding heavy. The key press on the piano doesn't have a lingering resonance to it. It's pretty fast resolving. So you hit down on the key and it goes thunk, but it's just a quick thunk. I can hear the sizzle in the background. It's not overemphasized. It doesn't seem to be interfering with any other portion of this song. There are string instruments that play in and out, and now we have the cello coming in. The cello sounds fairly smooth. No peakiness, no harshness. I'm going to increase the volume to 50%. And at 50%, this is incredibly loud for this song. The piano strike now is obviously louder. Still no harshness. I don't hear any distortion. The cello is clearly delineated between the piano and the cello, so the two frequencies are separated. No muddiness. I can hear that there is more than one cello. I can't give you a number, but it is at least one and likely two. I think I also hear a violin, but that's a little bit harder to pick up. I can hear the creaking of the chair back and forth, or the bench, as the pianist shifts forward and backwards in his seat. And it's a distinctive sound, rather sharp, but not overwhelming. So that creaking back and forth, you know it's a creaking. No muffled sound signature to that creaking, especially here. So let's stop for a second and let's go back to about 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And the piano is playing, the string instrument is playing, but the pianist, you can hear him, leaning forward a little bit and backwards on his bench, and you can hear that creaking, and it's a distinct creaking sound. It doesn't interfere with anything else. It is clearly separated from all the other frequencies playing at this point. So you have the piano, you have the cello, you have the violin, and then you have that creaking. And all of those elements in the song seem to be quite well separated. In other words, there's no melding of those frequencies. But let's listen for it again, starting back again at 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Yep. And let's go back a little bit further. That's 2 minutes and 25 seconds. The creaking actually happens at 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Yeah, clearly distinct. Airy, but not overwhelming air, as I said at the beginning. Meaning, the sound signature is not like you're standing outside in a field, but you're in a moderately sized room seating, I don't know, 400 or 500 people, and you are somewhere close to the stage, but the piano is unmuffled and there's no peakiness, there's no harshness, there's no overwhelming treble signature anywhere in this song. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. And now let's switch to the Mojo. Okay. We are back on the Mojo and let's start. The master volume is at 100% when it's switched to the Mojo. Currently the Mojo is at double orange, which is about 25% equivalent to the Cobalt. Already it sounds muffled, much more closed than the Cobalt's presentation. I'm going to increase the volume to about the same as it was at 50% on the Cobalt. Here we go. We're at double green, double teal, and now we are at double sea bluish. That seems to be about 50% with the Cobalt. The piano resonance actually stays longer on the Mojo than on the Cobalt. When the pianist hits down on the key is a little bit more muffled sounding because of that bass in the boost, boost in the bass. It sounds a little heavy, and it does seem a bit distorted, the piano does. I can hear the cello, but I can't say that it's at least one in cello. I have to say it's one cello. I still have not heard the violin yet. Now I hear the violin, but that piano frequency just bumps up against the violin frequency and drowns it out. It's not the distinct difference as it was on the Cobalt. No harshness, no peakiness whatsoever. I do hear the creaking, but the creaking sounds more muffled on the Mojo. We're coming up to the 2 minutes and 30 second mark where I've pointed out the creaking on the Cobalt. Let's listen for that. It's there, but it is much more muted, much more veiled. And in fact, the piano overwhelms that micro detail of the creaking Whereas on the Cobalt, it was distinct and absolutely clear, unmistakable. On the Mojo, it's much more muted. The other thing I want to point out is that the sizzling sound effect in this song is much clearer on the Cobalt than it is on the Mojo. What the Mojo tends to do is, because of that closed off nature of the Mojo and the bumped up bass, that sizzling and the crackling electric sensation sound in the background is drowned out by that piano, and the piano is just so thick and gooey on the Mojo. Now, you may very well like that presentation, but if we're talking about accuracy, resolution, and differentiation amongst the several instruments and elements in this mix, the Mojo simply cannot resolve and present in that manner. Okay, so now let's go to New Light by Kazuki. We're going to switch to the Cobalt. And as you know, a New Light has layers and layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of detail. You have kids playing in the background, you have the wind rustling, you have the guitar or the string instrument, you have a piano just playing very softly and soothingly, you have the individual, the person in this mix walking, and you can hear the walking and the crunching of the grass underneath that person's footsteps. It's a very nicely detailed song. With a pair of headphones like the S4R, it should present very well. So let's start with the Dragonfly, and we're going to actually bump this back down to about 25% and go up from there. Here we go. There's this sound almost like if you have a bicycle and you have the spokes in the bicycle, and every once in a while you see kids riding a bicycle that has, either a stick or some sort of, pointy device pointed towards the spoke, and it's hitting the spoke, and as they're rolling the bike down the street, it goes there's that sound signature at the very beginning of the song. Listen for it between 0 and 10 seconds, and you should be able to pick it up. Let's start again, and let's increase the volume as the song plays. Increase the volume to about 50% here. I can clearly hear the rustling of the wind. I hear the piano, good separation between the two. I hear the kids playing the background, excellent resolution. I hear them distinctly. I hear the person walking. I can hear the footsteps crunching on the grass. That piano has this very thick presentation, even with the Cobalt, but it's not interfering with any other portion of this song. It's not muting any other frequency to the extent where I would say I'm losing out on the detail. You have this synth sound that ratchets up in volume slowly. No harshness, no peakiness at all. I hear the guitar, the piano, the wind, and that synth sound that's coming up louder and louder and louder. And this is at its peak at this point. No harshness at all. I can hear the guitar distinctly separate from that higher volume synth sound. All right, so now let us go to the Mojo. And I have kept the Mojo at double C blue, which is about 50% as it was on the Cobalt. And we're just going to leave the volume at that setting. Here we go. Immediately more closed off. That bicycle spoke sound is much more muffled on the Mojo. The piano also sounds muffled, almost like you have a bed comforter draped over the piano. I hear the kids in the background, but they are also muffled. More muffled than on the Cobalt. I hear the wind rustle. And I hear the person walking, but that footstep and the crunching of the grass is significantly more muted on the Mojo and much more clear on the Cobalt. I hear that synth sound in the background slowly rising in volume. No harshness, no peakiness. But it's taking backstage to the guitar frequency right now. The guitar is a heavier mix in this juncture of the song. Now the synth is ever increasing in volume. It is at its peak. No harshness, no sibilants, no ear piercingness. Okay. So what I can say is that, as always with the Mojo and comparing with the Cobalt, the Mojo has a much more closed off presentation. The Cobalt has a more open, more airy presentation. With this particular song, if you just want to sit back and relax and get the emotion of the song, you could go with either. But, in my personal opinion, I think the emotion of the song, the sensation of the song, which is all subjective, by the way, as you know, it really comes from the details and the micro details. And once you start hearing the crunching of the grass, the kids in the background, the wind rustling, and you hear that synth just slowly creep up as the song is playing, it just has this ethereal and ghostly sensation to the song that I think is only accurately produced with a device that separates all of those elements in a song and brings them as they come. In comparison, when you have the Mojo, it just sounds more closed off and you're missing out on a lot of that detail, and it just sounds more muffled altogether. That's a sound signature preference. If you like it, great. If you don't, then this might not be the Mojo's best song in which to perform. Now, let us go to the big ship, and we're going to switch back to the Cobalt. Okay, we have the Cobalt selected. We're going to leave it at 50% volume, and we're going to start the big ship. There's static noise in the background. It's like if you've ever played a cassette, an audio cassette, and there's silence, there's nothing, there's that silence playing. You can hear it. It's just kind of like distortion. There's nothing there. That's the sound mixed into this song, and the Cobalt just brings it out very clearly. You have this synth type of instrument, no harshness, and you have a clickety-clackety. Somebody in the comments told me what it was, and I forget. All I want to say is carachas, and carachas are not real instruments. Marachas, that's what I meant. They're not marachas. No interference. There's a clear separation between the synth sound and the not carachas. The synth is getting louder and louder. No harshness, no treble, no trebly piercingness is what I mean to say. There's air in the song, but it still sounds intimate. Meaning, it's almost as if I am sitting in the first 2 or 3 rows in a medium-sized room. Good left and right separation. I hear there's multiple synth instruments left and right. And now there's another instrument that's playing at the synth music in the right ear cup, separate from the others. There's the clickety-clackety instruments I hear. And now it sounds like there's an electric guitar of some sort coming in. There's a lot being played in this mix, and everything is separate. Now, the Cobalt doesn't take all these instruments and separate them to provide hyper detail, like clear and definitive separation to each and everything. But you can hear everything. You definitely can hear each instrument, the way that it's being presented. There are probably devices that can do it with a bit more finesse, that can do it with a bit more clarity. But then you'd have to couple it with a pair of headphones that can resolve all of that clarity with the air, something like the HT800S, for example. Now let us switch to the Mojo. Okay, we are on the Mojo, and let's start again. Mojo is still set to the same volume of double C blue. So let me stop and start again and listen for that static sound at the beginning of the song. It sounds more muffled than it did on the Cobalt. More muted. The synth instrument is playing currently at medium volume, and you have the not carachas starting to come in, getting louder and louder. And it sounds like a drum instrument of some sort that is boosted. You can hear the thunk more clearly on the Mojo than on the Cobalt. There is soundstage left and right, but it's most definitely a more closed off experience on the Mojo than on the Cobalt. These synth instruments are gaining more and more volume, no harshness, no peakiness. And in just a few moments, we should start hearing the electric guitar. There's this other synth instrument that's supposed to be playing in the background, but it's really hard for me to hear. On the Cobalt, I clearly heard it on the right ear cup. The Mojo is not producing that very well at all. In fact, it is muffled, and I'm struggling to hear it. The electric guitar sounds more muffled, less separated than on the Cobalt. Still no peakiness, no harshness. Okay. So that was the treble test. I kept it to 3 songs because I think it's not rocket science to say that the Mojo is not a trebly emphasized DAC amp. And I think it's fairly easy for me to say that the Cobalt is not a trebly emphasized DAC amp. They're both fairly comparable when you talk about treble control. They don't emphasize analytical clarity. Neither of these. These are not anywhere close to THX quality hyper detail. Right? They're not even close to something like the Audio GD1 amp, which will give you that extra oomph and extra clarity in the top treble region. The Mojo seems to roll off the treble a lot more than the Cobalt. My hypothesis is that the reason this happens, at least in part, is because the Mojo is simply a warmer and more bass-emphasized player or DAC amp than the Cobalt. The Cobalt has more air and much better separation across the board. If there was something I could say definitively, like is the crowning achievement of the Cobalt versus the Mojo, is that the Cobalt does provide that extra detail and extra separation and that extra resolution within the instruments, within the mix. Whereas the Mojo blends that all together. One of the things that stood out for me, at least in this song, The Big Ship, is that around 2 minutes or so of this song, just before 2 minutes, about 1 minute and 30 seconds, you have the synth instruments, and there's this other synth instrument that comes in that's playing only in the right ear cup. And you can hear it distinctly different on the Cobalt than you can on the Mojo. The Mojo, I struggled to hear it on the Mojo. I couldn't hear it. It was muffled. On the Cobalt, it was clear as day. I could hear left and right on the synth instruments, and then on the right ear cup, on top of what I was hearing on the synth instrument, is that other secondary synth instrument only in the right ear cup. And then you have the guitar clearly separated. And then you have the sizzle, somewhere in the background. Now, neither of these two represented that static, sizzly sound at the beginning of the song throughout the mix. But in my opinion, the Mojo, when it did present it, made that sizzling much, much more muffled. And the Cobalt simply had a cleaner presentation of it. And from my recollection of tapes, and I used to listen to audio tapes often, because that's all I had growing up, I remember that sound. That's the sound of a tape. And the Cobalt seems to present it according to my recollection. Again, maybe my memory is faulty, which is probably true. At the end of the day, I think that as far as the treble response goes, you can't go wrong with either of these two. They both control treble, they both roll it off. But if you're talking about the separation of instruments, not just the control of the treble, then the Cobalt is the clear winner between the two when you do an A and B test. If you only heard the Mojo and you like the Mojo's sound signature, then that's great. Then you prefer the Mojo. But I would also say that the Cobalt is not that far off from the Mojo's relaxed presentation. And here's what I mean by relaxed presentation. I mean that the Mojo is really one of those instrument DAC amps that you can plug in and expect that if you have a harsh recording or if you have a pair of headphones that has that hyper detail, the Mojo is going to help round it off a little bit for you. It's going to help ease the burden into your ears, right? The Cobalt is very similar in that vein. It's not trying to be hyper analytical. It's not trying to give you all that hyper detail. It's not trying to provide you all that energy in the upper treble region. It's just presenting the song, and it's not even though it's rolling off the higher frequency, you still get that separation. So at the end of the day, it always comes down to sound preference, which one you prefer. My preference, if somebody was to ask me, well, I think it would be sound dependent. Not sound dependent, but song dependent. For Flight from the City, I think I would prefer the Cobalt. For New Light, I would prefer the Cobalt. For The Big Ship, that could be a toss-up because it depends on my mood. Do I want something that's more closed off, a little bit more intimate? Then it would be the Mojo. But do I want to hear a bit more air in the song and more separation of the instruments? Then the Cobalt. There are some songs that simply won't play all that well on the Mojo if your preference is to get the separation and hear the detail. And there are other songs where you say, you know what, I like it just the way it sounds at the Mojo. You just have to audition and you have to figure out for yourself what it is that you personally prefer. I hope this treble test has been of some help to some people. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you have any suggestions, please leave them in the comment section below. Once again, I am on Patreon, and if you could help support my channel, I will truly appreciate it. I'm doing a lot of reviews at the request of my viewers and subscribers, and if any of you are compelled to throw some money at me, a couple of bucks a month, that would be truly helpful to me. And I will be eternally thankful to you. If you are asking for a review, please visit the review form that is linked in the description below. That's going to basically walk you through to the process of requesting a particular review. Currently, I'm backlogged. I have a lot of responses, which I truly do appreciate, and I will get to all of them as quickly as I can. And finally, I hope that all of you have a wonderful Tuesday. I hope that you have a wonderful evening, and if you're just waking up, I hope you have a great morning and a pleasant end to your day. Have a great night.